Open this hearing by reading the required information about us being able to meet on Zoom. As Chair of Division 2 of the House Finance Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with House Rule 67 and the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. This public meeting is pertaining to transportation and safety, going through their presentations. Please note that there is no physical location for members of the public to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with emergency order, I am confirming that all members of the committee and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform, and public access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting by the Zoom platform or by telephone. All necessary access information has been made available in the House calendar and through the electronic calendar on the General Court website. The notice for this meeting complies with House rules and RSA 91A. Anyone who has a problem accessing the meeting should email lba_fiscal@leg.state.nh.us. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. LBA staff are on the meeting assisting us. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. Representative Lynn, are you here?
I am, yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, would you
Oh,
call the
great.
roll, please?
I will. Yes, Representative Bucco?
Yes, thank you. I'm present. I'm at home in Conway, and there's no one else in the room.
All right. Representative Danielson is not here.
That's correct.
Representative Heath?
Mary Heath. I'm here at my home in Manchester, New Hampshire, and my husband is in the other room.
All right. And Representative Lynn, I'm here, obviously. Representative Murray?
Good morning. Kate Murray is here in Newcastle. That was my barky dog asking to go out. My husband has taken him out. They'll both be back in shortly. Dog will stay here. Husband will head back down to the basement.
Thank you. Representative Petrie?
Representative Petrie is here in Farmington. There's a dog and a wife roaming around the halls.
Thank you. And Representative Umberger?
Yes, I'm at my home in Kearsarge, New Hampshire. My husband's in the house someplace. I don't know where.
I'm sorry, I should say I'm in the room. I'm at home. I'm in the room alone. My wife and son are elsewhere in the house.
Okay, so Mickey, would you please bring up Commissioner Sheehan, if she's not already here?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Victoria Sheehan, the Commissioner for DOT. It's my pleasure to be with you all today, and thank you for this opportunity to talk about our budget. The others on the call this morning are Bill Cass, our Assistant Commissioner, Chris Wozchuk, our Deputy Commissioner, Marie Mullen is our Director of Finance, and Kathy Mulhey Hampson, who should be on here as well. I don't see Marie. Maybe she hasn't been promoted yet.
No, she just joined,
Okay.
and I'm going to pull her in now.
So Marie will be the one sharing her screen and showing the presentation.
Are you sharing or do you want me to, Commissioner?
Marie, would you share, please? Or would you like?
I have it right up. So
Okay,
Mickey,
please
do
go
I have
ahead.
permission to share?
You should be able to, Marie. I don't know if it's given you,
Okay.
there you go.
How's that? Great.
Okay. Well, this morning we're going to begin by giving you an overview of the department and providing you with some information on our roles and responsibilities. In addition to the presentation that we prepared for today, we did prepare a budget book. For those of you that are returning to this committee, you'll recall that we've done this for past budgets. And that document was provided to Mickey and I believe was posted. We'll be printing hard copies and we'll make sure that you get those, but we wanted to ensure that you were aware of the digital version that has been provided. That document is a great tool for you all. For each of our different accounting units and bureaus, we have a description of the work that each of those sections completes each year with some actual metrics around what can be accomplished with the dollars that are provided, as well as information on how many full-time employees we have supporting that area of the department. So we won't walk through that budget book today in detail. We'll start with this high-level overview presentation, but we look forward to working with the committee and coming back to provide any additional information that you might need from us as you work on the budget for 22 and 23. The other document that we'll be mailing out with the budget books is our fact book. While we are going to be working with you on the budget itself, we recognize that there might be other questions that you have, maybe questions on projects in your region of the state, or specific questions about our operations. And so we have a fact book that we prepare at the start of every new legislative session so that most importantly, you have contact information for everyone at the DOT and can get answers to questions as they arise. So look out for the hard copies of both the budget book and our fact book. But this morning, we're going to walk you through a presentation. You're going to be hearing from myself, from Bill Cass, Chris Wojcik, and Marie. We have plenty of time, so we'd like to be able to address your questions as we go through the slides. So please stop us at any time. And if you're ready, Madam Chair, we'll begin.
I'm ready. I was on mute, sorry. Thank you. Please.
Okay, so most importantly, our mission here at DOT is to provide transportation excellence, enhancing the quality of life in New Hampshire. We are very aware that the work that we do each and every day significantly impacts every person traveling through New Hampshire and every one of our residents. But most importantly, we're in the business of moving people and goods, which directly impacts the state's economy. And so we are trying to provide a safe, reliable, and well-maintained system so that everyone can get where they need to go and that goods and services can be delivered. And we work very diligently to stretch the value of the dollars that were provided to deliver on this mission and purpose. Next slide. So just so you understand how our org chart looks, so we have 3 commissioners, myself, Bill Cass as Assistant Commissioner and Chief Engineer, oversees all things highway. So that includes the Division of Project Development and the Division of Operations. And then Chris Wojcik as our Deputy Commissioner oversees our other 3 divisions, Finance, Policy Administration, as well as Aeronautics, Rail, and Transit. This particular representation of our department makes it look like we're quite siloed, but in reality, we're a very flat organization. So for example, the Bureau of Environment is under the Division of Project Development. but they support the entire department, even on occasion, aeronautics, rail, and transit as necessary. So while we have technical disciplines located within one division, there are resources being brought to bear across all of our different programs and work effort. Next slide. So how do we manage all of this work? So in addition to the 3 commissioners, we have a director for each of the divisions. And then for the larger divisions of project development and operations, we also have an assistant director providing support in each of those areas. And perhaps the most important piece of information today is the phone number on the screen. That is the front office direct line. So anytime you have questions for commissioners or directors, please use that number and we are here to help. And Kathy is also on today because she acts as our legislative liaison. And so if for any reason you're looking for information and it's particularly time sensitive, you can always reach out to Kathy directly and she will collect the information from the responsible party here at DOT. Next slide. So just to give you a sense of how big our agency is and what our responsibilities are, we have around 1,650 full-time employees. In addition, we have a number of both part-time as well as seasonal employees. For example, in the Bureau of Turnpikes, many of our toll taker positions are part-time positions. And then because of the nature of our work, we do hire seasonal employees either for the winter season or for the summer construction season, depending on the area and the programs that we are responsible for. On the highway side of the house, we have 2,160 state bridges that we're responsible for. One of the statistics that's always of interest to the legislature is how many of those bridges are on what we in New Hampshire call the red list. The red list is really a list of all of the bridges that are considered structurally deficient in the state. In other words, structures that are in a poor or very poor condition. They are safe. We inspect them much more frequently. We actually go out there every 6 months to check them rather than every 2 years. But those are bridges that are reaching the end of their useful life and need either significant rehab or replacement. So this is a number that we always pay close attention to. So as we work on the budget, we'll be talking about the condition of the infrastructure and then the funding as well as the personnel needed to continue to address both our bridges and our pavements.
Excuse me, Commissioner, if I could, are your 650 employees, is that the authorized number of employees or is that what you actually have on hand?
That is the authorized number of positions. Later on, we'll talk about one of our challenges. Last year with the budget, or sorry, with the funding uncertainty and revenue impacts of COVID-19, the governor implemented a hiring freeze and we do have a very high vacancy rate at this time that we're working to address. But we'll talk about that in more detail later in the presentation.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure that was authorized.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And then in addition to our state-owned assets, we also are responsible for inspecting all of the municipal bridges in the state, of which there's around 1,690. We are not responsible for the work that's performed on those structures, but we do inspect them and work closely with the towns to make them aware of any issues that there might be. Next slide. And then on the highway side, we're responsible for approximately 4,600 center lane miles of roadway. Most of that roadway is both summer and winter maintained by the department, but there is approximately 300 miles that are owned by DOT and town maintained. And with this number of miles of highway, every year we're striving to pave around 550 center lane miles. That's what's required to keep our pavement infrastructure in a good state of repair. And we'll talk a little bit more about this number as well as we move through the presentation. But we're not just responsible for bridges and pavements. There's countless other roadside assets out there, from all of our highway signs to our guardrail. Every year we have to stripe the roadways. And then of course, there's all the traffic signals and other devices along our highways as well. So we have been working to build out inventories in all of these areas. And then not on the screen is, obviously there are pipes, culverts, and closed drainage systems, as well as sidewalks and crosswalks and other assets that we're responsible for. And then we are a multimodal DOT. As I mentioned, we have a division of aeronautics, rail, and transit. While we don't operate air, rail, or bus service as a DOT, we do work very closely with all of the providers of those services in the state. So there's 195 miles of active state-owned rail line, as well as 24 public access airports in the state and 11 public transit systems that we partner with. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. Next slide. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Wojcik, who will give you a high-level overview of the budget. And then as the presentation progresses, we'll do a deeper dive. So Chris.
Good morning, members of the committee. So this slide, what this shows is fiscal year 2020 actual expenditures, which were much lower than the budget. And the actual expenditures were 681 million. On the municipal aid and construction side, 419 million, and on the operating side, 262 million. So, for example, municipal aid, that will include block grant aid, pass-through, which is a direct pass-through from our budget to the municipalities. It also includes indirect technical and program assistance, such as the TAP program. Construction costs primarily consist of projects that are in the 10-year plan that the department progresses. On the operating side, basically those costs are costs for the department to maintain and operate the current infrastructure, as well as to plan, engineer, and oversee the construction program. You can see the breakup. Primarily, roughly 2/3, 50% is municipalities, the construction, and then the rest for the operating. As you can see, the entire budget is a makeup of highway fund, which is 36%, the federal program, federal funds, which flow through the highway fund, 35%, the turnpike funds, 19%, other, which may be non-budgeted expenditures such as TIFIA and bonded capital projects. Those are the other, and then general fund is the 1%. Next slide. This is kind of the history of our authorized full-time positions. On the previous slide, Commissioner reported that 1,650 were our current level of authorized positions. You can see that has been the case in the current biennium, and then that is the case moving forward. We're not adding any additional positions. But one thing I want to note here is that our authorized positions have fallen dramatically since 2010. You can see that in 2010, we had over 1,828 positions, and we're roughly 178 fewer positions today. And we have been at that level for quite some time. In addition to that, I just want to point out that we have a 15% vacancy rate right now. So we have 241 vacant positions, and we are working actively to fill those. The department has been, really challenged with the hiring freeze and being able to keep up with all the work. So we are moving forward to fill with the hiring freeze being lifted.
Can you repeat the vacancy rate?
15%, a little over 15%, 241 vacant positions at this time. Next slide. So here's the funding summary for budget, or the governor's recommended budget. Fiscal year 22, it's 674 million. Municipal aid and construction, 354 million. Operating, 320 million. And then in fiscal year 23, 684 million. On the municipal aid and construction, 350, and operating 334. I do want to point out that when I did present fiscal year 20, the operating side was considerably lower, and that's because of when COVID hit. You know, we really tightened our belt, I would say, and only expended absolutely necessary, budget. And we had a very, very high lapse in fiscal year 20 because of the impacts on COVID and the need to really watch how much was spent. A lot of things in that year did not get done. So this is a budget that, really, tries to do all the necessary things that the department's responsible for in order to operate and maintain the system, as well as progress the projects in a 10-year plan. Next slide. So this is just a makeup, and it shows FY20 actuals, the FY20 adjusted authorized, our agency budget and governor's budget present proposals for 22 as well as 23. And you can see the light blue is federal. So you can see federal is pretty stable at the roughly a little over 200 million level, with the exception of fiscal year 22. That jumps up to 248 million, excuse me. And the reason for that is with the COVID relief, New Hampshire's receiving $41 million, and we're putting that right into the budget to offset the revenue loss. So you can see there's a considerable jump in fiscal year 22 from what we presented at the 207 million to 248 million. That's the 41 million of COVID relief funds from the federal government.
So perhaps, Chris, if you don't mind, we'll pause for a second to explain what relief dollars transportation has received. So when the CARES Act was passed, there was direct assistance provided to aeronautics and to public transportation. But in that first package, there was nothing specifically dedicated to highway uses. Later on, when subsequent relief packages were passed, including the package that was approved by Congress at the end of calendar year 2020, then there was additional monies provided, once again for airports and for public transportation. But that last relief bill also provided the 41 million for highways to address lost revenue. So that's what Chris is referring to. In addition, the department has been supporting some of the statewide response to COVID-19, performing tasks that don't pertain directly to transportation, but doing our part to support the governor and other agencies. And so we have also been reimbursed with either FEMA dollars, or shall be reimbursed in the future for the work that we're performing currently, or we did receive some of the gopher relief funds as well. So I just wanted to make sure that you weren't thinking it was all coming from one pot. We actually did receive dedicated funds in the CARES Act and then in the subsequent relief bill. We're not talking about the 1.25 billion of gopher funds, although DOT did have access to that as well. Sorry, Chris.
Okay. No, thank you for that, Commissioner. That helps explain that funding much better. You can see other funding levels are pretty stable at around that low $80 million range. General funds, which basically fund our aeronautics, rail, and transit bureaus, they are very stable at that 1.3 to $1.6 million level. Very little general funds flow into the department. On the highway side, I noted that the actuals were, considerably low in fiscal year 20. On the highway side, expended 194 million that year because of, the department's diligent and really watching how highway funds were being expended. In fiscal year 21, the budgeted level was 230 million, and you can see in the 22 and 23 budgets, we're slightly below that in 22 and right about that with the governor's budget in 23. And then the Turnpike side is fairly stable at that $157 million range. And I'll talk about the Turnpike in a few moments, but that does include both operating and capital work on the Turnpike side. The Turnpike system also took a hit in fiscal year 20 due to COVID. So you can see the expenditures were dramatically lower on the Turnpike side as well. Any questions before I move on? Okay, next slide, Marie. And I'll turn this over to the commissioner to talk about these next two slides.
Can I just ask a question?
Representative Heath,
about the
did you have a
lapse
question?
amount?
Yes, absolutely, Representative.
How much was the lapse, please?
Um,
Our lapse was $37 million last year in
Thank
FY20. Obviously, that's not sustainable. We feel there were a lot of new programs that were budgeted for preventative maintenance and equipment that we were not able to purchase, and that was a reason why there was such a significant lapse.
Later in the presentation, we'll talk about the issues and challenges and talk a little bit more about where we lapsed the dollars last year.
If I may, that lapse was only on the highway side. That 37 million that Marie noted is only in highway funds. The Turnpike system also lapsed a considerable dollar value. I don't have it right in front of me, but it was close to 10 million.
Yeah, and I'll just say that's DOT, that does not include safety's lapse.
So we'll start by talking about the general fund. Since we use so few general fund dollars, we'll go from smallest to largest program and talk about the highway fund last. So a little bit of a deeper dive on the bureaus of aeronautics, rail, and transit. As I mentioned, we work closely with all of the public use airports, and we inspect the airports, and many of those that qualify for federal funds, those federal dollars flow through the department as well. So there are 3 commercial airports in New Hampshire, Manchester, Lebanon, and Pease. And so we work closely with those 3 commercial airports. But then there's what we call block grant airports, and that's the other 9 airports that are eligible for federal funds. Unfortunately, there's some smaller airports that do not receive federal aid, and we provide some assistance to those airports with the revenues that we collect from aircraft registration. And the department is responsible for registering all aircraft in the state. So while we have less day-to-day operational responsibilities at the airports, we are very much working hand in hand with them and advocating on their behalf. On the rail side, I mentioned before that we have active state-owned track in New Hampshire. So we have about 195 miles of active track that the DOT owns. And we have 6 operating agreements with 4 freight providers and 2 tourist services that run on those corridors. In addition, there's about 340 miles of inactive corridor, which we oversee and coordinate the management of. Many of these corridors are being used for rail trails as an interim use, and we partner with the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, specifically the Bureau of Trails, who have some of the day-to-day management responsibilities for these sections. And then lastly, on the public transit side, there are 11 local public transit systems that we work with. In addition, we do coordinate with all of the private bus operators in New Hampshire. And then Lastly, we operate our own intercity commuter service called the Boston Express. There is an operating agreement with Concord Coach who provides that service for us, but it is a state funded service. But beyond the fixed route services that our transit systems provide, we're also responsible for the allocation of federal transit dollars to community transportation providers, and specifically human service and volunteer driver programs that are serving primarily seniors and individuals with disabilities. So we have a lot of different types of federal funding that come from the Federal Transit Administration with very strict parameters in how we can spend that, from dollars that are committed to our smaller urban systems to dollars that go to rural transportation, and then lastly, the human service and volunteer driver programs.
Excuse me, Commissioner, did you say that DOT runs the Boston Express?
Yep, that's a state-owned service that is operated by Concord Coach.
Okay.
Contract with us.
Is that profitable, or do they, Concord Coach gives you money and?
So pre-pandemic, this was one of the most successful bus services in the country. We started to provide this service as one of our commitments as we advanced the widening of I-93 from Salem to Manchester. And we have seen great ridership pre-pandemic with record numbers riding specifically on the FE Everett Route 3 corridor. And I would say that service had been thriving. Obviously, since the pandemic, with the reduction in commuter traffic, we are trying to project what the future holds for all of our intercity and commuter bus services, because certainly we're not seeing the ridership that we were previously, with so many people continuing to telework and not drive down to the city as often. There's also folks who would go down to Boston for medical appointments, as an example, that rely heavily on this service, as well as individuals who were flying from Logan Airport who rely on these services to get to the city. And a lot of the customers just haven't come back yet because telemedicine is still being used and vacation travel is still significantly limited.
Thank you very much.
Next slide, please, Marie. So the general funds that we're allocated are primarily going to fund the Aeronautics Bureau and the Railroad Bureau. The Transit Bureau is primarily funded with federal funds. And earlier I mentioned that we received assistance through the CARES Act. Usually we have to come up with the match for both operating and capital purchases on our transit systems. But a lot of the CARES Act provisions have allowed us to access 100% federal funding, and that certainly reduces the burden on municipalities and others who were struggling to come up with a match to access some of those federal dollars. So our budget currently includes $200,000 per year of general funds for transit operating match to access those federal dollars. So our budget's very small on the general fund side. For 2022, it's 1.5 million, and for 2023, it's 1.6 million. We only had one additional need in our agency phase, and that was actually funded by the governor in his phase. During the last budget, we had requested a new position, an aeronautics planning position. Obviously, what we call UASs, or what people not commonly refer to as drones, is an industry that's expanding very rapidly. And so during the last budget, we advocated for a position that could be dedicated to working through some of the challenges with the increase in the number of drones operating in the state. That position was funded in the last budget, but because of the COVID challenges, we did not move forward with filling it. And so that position is included in the governor's budget, and we're hoping to move forward with filling that vacancy now that there is more certainty around future revenues. So that really is all of our information to share on the general fund side. We'd be happy to answer any remaining questions, or if you specifically would like more information on the various services that are provided, or have questions about aeronautics, rail, or transit funding that we receive from the federal government, we'd be happy to get that for you. All right, I'm hearing none, so I think
Yeah,
we'll.
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, so I'll turn it back to Chris, and he'll talk about the Turnpike system in a little bit more detail.
Hello again. So just to give you a brief overview of the Turnpike system in, where it's located, basically in the southeastern part of the state. On the Turnpike system is really made up of 3 Turnpike segments. The Central Turnpike extends from the state line in Nashua all the way up to exit 14 in Concord. So it runs along Route 3 of the F.E. Everett, from Nashua through Merrimack, through Bedford. Is co-joined with 293 through Manchester, and then meets up with 93 through the Hooksett Toll Plaza, and then, like I said, ends at exit 14 in Concord. On the eastern side, we have both the Blue Star, which runs from state line to state line on I-95, and then the Spalding, which runs from the Portsmouth Traffic Circle all the way up to exit 18 in Milton. So it's 89 miles long in total, 172 bridges, 8 toll facilities. It is an enterprise fund. So for example, all the Turnpike revenue that's collected on the Turnpike system must be used on the Turnpike. It cannot be used for any other purpose. Turnpike revenue pays for operation and maintenance on the system. Any debt service that exists on the current outstanding bonds that we use to build portions of the system. R&R work, which is in essence work that is done to make sure the system's in good working order. That work entails paving, drainage, guardrail, some bridge preservation work. And then lastly, it flows down to the capital program, such as the major projects that we have underway in the 10-year plan, the F.E. Everett widening, Manchester exit 6, and the Bow Concord project. Just recently, the Newington Dover project on the Spalding got completed. So that's basically what the capital improvements entail. And all that is included in the 10-year plan. In fiscal year 20, there were 110 million transactions with a total revenue of 131 million. Just for comparison purposes, we use fiscal year 19 kind of to compare from the kind of pre-COVID to post-COVID effect. So in fiscal year 19, we had 123.7 million transactions. So in fiscal year 20, there was 11% fewer transactions. Next slide. So this kind of shows over the last 10 years, going back to fiscal year 2010, kind of what the fund history for toll revenue looks like. And you can see it's fairly flat in 2010, 11 through 14 at about that 117 million. Then it started to rise in fiscal year 19. It kind of peaked at 145 million of toll revenue, an additional 8.7 million of other revenue, which consists of interest. We have a Build America bond subsidy, Hooksett Welcome Center revenue, things like that. And then COVID hit, and it has had a huge impact on the system. Fiscal year 20 revenue is down about 11% from fiscal year 19. Fiscal year 21, we're forecasting that we're going to end up at about 17% lower than fiscal year 19. And then it's going to start improving, but fiscal year 22 and 23, we're still going to be down 13 and 9% below fiscal year 19 high. So that just kind of gives you a snapshot of what's happening on the Turnpike system. Next slide, please. So here we've been able to track the impact that COVID has had on traffic. This is a counter actually that it's an automated counter that we have in Concord on I-93 between exits 12 and 13. You can see, and I do want to say that this shape of a graph is very similar to what's happening on the Turnpike system. Pre-COVID, back last February in 2020, traffic was slightly higher than the previous year. And this gives you a comparison of the current year to the previous year's same week traffic. When COVID hit, traffic dropped dramatically. At this counter, dropped down to 50% below the previous year's level. That was back at the end of March, first week in April of last year. And then it started climbing back up as things opened up a little bit. In the summertime, in June and July, traffic was roughly between 14, I would say 12 to 14% below the previous year. And then that kind of existed through the summer into the early fall. And then again, we're now seeing traffic settling at about 18 to 20% below last year's levels. Now, certainly up in the North Country, in the western part of the state, I think traffic, although it has a similar shape, has not been as significant in terms of reduction. The North Country and western part of the state may be seeing traffic at about 10, 15% lower than previous year, whereas again, this is at about 18 to 20% lower. On the Turnpike system, traffic, the low peaked at 58% below the previous year's level. That again was at the end of March, early April. And right now we're seeing traffic right around the 20% below last year's levels. So very significant impact on revenue. Next slide. So on the turnpikes, what we do is we have a model which helps us with a 10-year plan, as well as we take a look at what we need for operation and maintenance. And COVID has had a huge impact on the turnpike system. So we do have a consultant that does traffic and revenue forecasting. They do investment grades. So for example, if the turnpike system goes to secure additional bonding, investment grade traffic and revenue information is necessary. So this consultant firm helps us with that. The blue line represents their forecast from October 2019. You can see that fiscal year 20 was going to be right about that $135 million level. And it increased beyond 22 at about a little over 1% a year. With COVID, and we're taking, they gave us a low estimated range, mid-range, and really severe. So we've taken their mid-range impact. And you can see fiscal year 20, we're roughly down almost $15 million in total revenue from the previous forecast. Fiscal year 21, down 23 million. And then fiscal year 22, 12 and 23, 10 million. So in aggregate there, we're looking at a very significant impact over from fiscal year 20 to 24. We're talking about a $71 million reduction in total revenue from what was previously forecasted. Over this 10-year period, we're looking at 121 million lower than what was previously forecasted, which is going to have an impact on the capital work on the turnpike system. We're going to see potential delays anywhere from 1 to 2 years on some of those capital projects. And we'll be able to manage that. But I just want to give the committee just a little bit of an insight into how COVID has impacted the turnpike system. And certainly there's a similar impact on the highway side.
Excuse me, Representative Murray, you have a question?
Thank you very much. Why wouldn't the revenues rebound back to pre-COVID? Is this indication that you think telecommuting is basically a thing to stay, is here to stay?
Yes, so what they were basing their projections on was COVID lasting anywhere, this COVID impacting and lasting anywhere from 3 to 6 years. And then long-term, they feel that this virtual work environment is going to have an impact on the commute. To what extent? We picked the mid-range, certainly on the lower end, they're thinking it could be anywhere from, 1 day a week to 2 days a week. And if you really think about that, if everybody works from home 1 day a week, that's a 20% reduction. So long term, we're going to have some firms require people to go back to the office full time, and maybe have maybe a more liberal work from home type of approach. You're going to have other firms that will allow people to work from home, entirely. So it is going to change the landscape. I think of how traffic is going to evolve long term. Now, what we're also seeing just very early is that there are more local trips occurring. So these trips really are more of the long commuting trips, and that's what's happening on the Turnpike system. That's more of a commuter and recreational corridors. But I think people, as they work from home, they're traveling more, maybe as many miles, maybe slightly fewer miles, but they're traveling more locally and not necessarily on the interstates and Turnpike systems.
While COVID-19 has had some devastating impacts on individuals, the explosion of technology will have lasting benefits for everyone. So in the transportation sector, we're talking about the 4 different types of trips. There's the commuting trips where telework is likely to continue to be expanded beyond pre-COVID levels. So as Chris is saying, firms, obviously they want to get people back in the office. People are craving that human interaction. And especially companies that are trying to innovate, you need to have people in the room together, but it is highly likely folks will be given more flexibility, which is great for work-life balance, allowed to work from home to a greater extent. So there's going to be some impact. But then I touched on it earlier, there is the expansion of telemedicine. So certainly people will still be traveling to specialty hospitals for consultations, but maybe some of that follow-up care can be done locally and use telemedicine to complement that. Again, terrific for the individuals and the quality of the care they're receiving, but travel will be different. With higher ed, more and more online learning, that's also going to have an impact on trips. As it is, we see significant changes in travel patterns when the schools are in session or not. And then the last one, of course, is online shopping and the expansion of Amazon and other delivery services where people aren't going to the stores as much, but the transportation network is just as important for the movement of the goods to the individuals. So as Chris mentioned, this is a challenging time for our transportation planners. We have to work very closely with chambers of commerce and with major employers to understand how they're going to be doing business going forward, to know what those lasting impacts are going to be and what their transportation needs are. At the end of the day, we're here to provide the infrastructure to support them. So we have to continue to listen to how their business model might be changing so that we can understand what the longer term needs are going to be. So it's great for the individual. The explosion of technology is certainly improving quality of life, and that's what we're all about. But it's challenging for us to forecast right now while we're still seeing different behavior because of the risks associated with COVID-19. We can't discern how people are behaving today. Is it truly because of changes to keep reducing the spread and keep people safe, or are they permanent changes because it's a more efficient way for them to do business?
Representative Petrie, you have a question? Did you yeah, go ahead.
You're still muted.
I guess Alt A doesn't work. Very good. Thank you, Commissioner, for taking my question. You guys do an awesome job and really appreciate that. What's the status of 93? Is that we on budget, and when is the estimated completion date? And also exit 4, is the pandemic having an effect on that?
So the expansion project to widen from Salem to Manchester, that project was declared substantially complete this fall, but we are working on some punch list items and finalizing the last few items. But essentially, that contract and that project is complete. The other project, the construction of Exit 4A, has been delayed slightly. We were advancing that project as a design build contract. In other words, instead of going all the way through final design and then awarding the construction to a contractor, we had advanced the plans to about the 30% design stage, and we were procuring a team to finalize the design and start construction somewhat concurrently in an effort to try and shorten the overall project duration. Unfortunately, when we opened the bids on that project, the prices came in much, much higher than our own DOT estimate. There's some modifications to the scope that we believe we can make to reduce risk for the contracting teams and hopefully reduce the cost. But as a result, we have made the determination that is more efficient and effective to advance this as a traditional design bid build project. So we have just procured or selected a designer to work on the final design. That effort will be starting shortly. We hope to get that contract before Governor and Council this spring. And so we're going to be about another year after that contract is awarded from being able to finish the first phase. So basically, we're hoping to break ground in the spring of 2022. And that project, we're very confident that we can deliver it for a cost that is much closer to what we had estimated. And that's what we've set to work doing right now. Bill Cass is on with us this morning. Bill, is there anything else you want to add?
No, just what you said, that again, back to your initial question, Representative Petrie, that essentially the 93 widening is complete. Exit 4A was always a separate project interchange there. The one last thing that will be going on, there is a restriping contract that is technically part of the 93 project. It is kind of a punch list item, as the commissioner said. So this spring, we'll see some durable pavement markings for the whole length of 93 and some final punch list items, fixing some signs and stuff. But essentially, it's all done.
Thank you very much.
So there's no other questions. Next slide. So basically on the Turnpike side, because of the COVID impacts on revenue, it really required roughly a 7.5% or $12.5 million budget reduction in fiscal year 22 from the 21 budget. That was primarily on the capital side. Some of the capital work got moved out. Fiscal year 23's budget is flat to fiscal year 22. There were no additional prioritized needs that were requested. All the operation, maintenance, debt service, and R&R requirements have been funded in the biennium. And overall, as I noted, we have some large capital work that will require the delay of 1 to 2 years in order to have enough revenue coming in to fund that work. So that is a Turnpike. If there's any questions, we can take them now in the Turnpike system. So certainly, if there are any questions that come up in the future, we'll be happy to answer them at a later time.
All right. If there aren't any questions, I'll move on to the.
Representative Hennessy, has a question?
Excuse me, Representative Heath has a question.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you,
sorry.
Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I remember when we did the last budget cycle, there were a lot of concerns. I see here you've targeted operations, maintenance, depth service. There were a lot of concerns about your equipment on the highway. I'm sorry, on the Turnpike. Does that continue, or has that been addressed?
So on the Turnpike side, the equipment has always been funded at a reasonable level to meet whatever requirements the Turnpike system needed. It's on the highway side that we have issues on equipment. And I'll talk about that
Okay,
later
great.
on.
Thank you. I always get them confused.
Thank you, Representative Heath.
Go ahead, Chris.
I'm all set. I'm going to turn it over to Marie now to talk about the highway fund.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and the members of the committee. I'm going to talk to you and get into a little more detail on the highway fund. Just as a general overview, the highway fund is not the DOT, and DOT is not the highway fund. There is some misnomer that we control the highway fund, which we do not. It is the fund which the unrestricted revenue from the gas tax or road toll and registration fees are collected by the Department of Safety. It's also the fund where our federal construction program, our Garvey bonds and TIFIO proceeds are collected and go through here. So that's why you'll see that municipal construction aid and construction blue section. That includes all of our federal construction reimbursements and any of these bonds and TIFIA proceeds. It's the primary source for our operating budget, the highway fund. Revenue from the highway fund is appropriated to various agencies. So not only does DOT have get money to use from the highway fund, but safety, the judicial branch, and justice also receive funds from the highway fund. In fiscal year 2020, the actual expenditures, when we break it down, about 59% of the highway fund was appropriated to DOT, or was expensed by DOT, 26% to other agencies, so that includes safety and justice, and 15% to the municipalities. So that's primarily that 15% is the block grant aid distribution that by law 12% of the gross revenue that's received is distributed to cities and towns. So, and that 15% gets added to DOT's percentage when you see the budget breakdown. For the, I know some of you may be familiar with RSA 99B. This is the requirement that the highway fund, not less than 73% is dedicated to DOT, DOS not more than 26%, and other agencies not more than 1%. So in the 22-23 biennium, it looks like the RSA 99B is met. I'm not sure if it needs to be in HB2, if it needs to be suspended. In prior years, there has been a requirement for it to be suspended because those percentages were not met. Mickey will obviously verify the percentages. My rough estimates based on what the governor presented was about 75%, 0.3% will be is DOT for the biennium. Safety is 24%, and other agencies is 0.7%. So it appears that we're meeting that requirement for RSA 99B, but depending on changes that are made, that provision in the law has been suspended in the past and could potentially need to be suspended. So next, just an overview on the highway fund revenue. So many of you are probably aware the highway fund over time has had several one-time fixes. The revenue has been declining in the highway fund. You can see it was here at almost a $340 million a year. And now we're, it's down to about 254 million projected in the next budget. There were several one-time fixes, if you want to call them, to try to balance the highway fund over the years. The first was this $30 registration surcharge back in 2010 and 2011. That was repealed after 2011. So that was only a temporary 2-year revenue for that. During that same period, this was back in the recession of 2009, 2010, where we had, significant decreases in revenue. And we also had a deficit of $50 million in the highway fund. So we've had to, so some of these one-time fixes were done. So one of them is this retro Turnpike toll credit. The department was able to go back on projects, and let me just clarify, our federal program requires a match. So we have generally, it's an 80% federal funds, 20% required state match. The state does not provide state highway funds to match the federal program. So therefore we use toll credits from the Turnpike system to match that program. So in essence, it makes all of our projects 100% federally funded. So it doesn't increase the pot of money we get from the feds or anything like that. It just makes all of our projects 100% federally funded. So during that time frame back in 2010, 11, 12, there was a look back provision. So we went back to some projects that we had used state funds to match, and we went back and we retroactively took toll credits to bring back that revenue into the state. The next item down here was the I-95 bridge sale. So at one time, the highway owned the I-95 bridge between Maine and New Hampshire. And that was sold to the Turnpike system to raise revenue for the highway fund. It also made sense from a maintenance and operations perspective, because there was a very small portion that was highway and everything around it was all Turnpike. So it did make sense, but that sale was for $120 million. It was supposed to be paid off over a 20-year period, but because of the issues in the highway fund, it was paid off over a 6-year period. So you can see once the payment of that note was made, there's no more revenue coming into the highway fund for that. And then we have some miscellaneous up here. At one time, our federal revenue related to our overhead that we collect on the federal program was going into unrestricted. That was changed and is now restricted, and it covers our operating expenditures for our highway design and several other areas, some of our bridge maintenance and traffic areas that were previously where we used highway funds, unrestricted highway funds for that. So those federal funds are now restricted and cover a portion of our salaries and benefits within the DOT. Some other one-time revenue fixes that you don't see here because they have been restricted in fiscal year 16 and 17. 8.3 million from the SB 367, which was the 4.2 cent gas road toll increase in 2014. Prior to us finalizing the TIFIA loan, 8.3 million of that revenue was dedicated to highway operations that year to help balance the highway fund. So that was about 16 million over that biennium. In FY17, 13.9 million was transferred from the general fund into the highway fund to balance it for that biennium for the fiscal year 18 and 19 biennium. And then in fiscal year 20, for this biennium, $4 million was transferred from the general fund to balance the FY 2021 budget. And then currently in the FY 22, 23 budget, mostly in FY 22, we have the $41 million from the relief fund that is assisting because of the lost revenue. And there's also the 8.1 million transfer from the general fund. So as you can see, over time, we've had reduced revenue. We've had several one-time fixes that keeps kind of kicking this problem down the road. We've been lucky to be able to have the general fund transfers and these other things to help balance the budget. But you've seen from some of the, the other slides with our positions, though, because of these reductions, we've had significant decreases in positions, almost 200 positions back in that time. And then you'll see in some of the other issues that the commissioner goes through later with our equipment, we've had, having to defer the maintenance on our equipment and those type of things.
Representative Petrie, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And my all button works. Right. Thanks for taking the question. Is 93 coming in on budget? And the way we financed, I believe it was kind of unique. Could you explain how that's going to work and what the debt service is going to be?
Yes.
I-93 was, the current budget was around 800 million, and yes, we're coming in under budget. For the benefit of the new members to this committee, Chris mentioned earlier both Garvey as well as TIFIA. Garvey is grant anticipation revenue vehicles, in other words, a federal bond that is backed by future federal apportionment. And TIFIA is the Transportation Infrastructure Finance Innovation Act. That's actually a loan that was backed by the gas tax increase that was passed, that re-referenced in SB 367. So I'll let Marie talk a little bit more about the actual funding for 93, but I just wanted to make sure you understood that that project was funded with both federal bonds as well as a federal loan. The federal bonds, we pay the debt service with future federal highway dollars, and then the loan we pay with the state revenues coming in through SB 367, the road toll or gas tax increase. So Marie, do you want to talk about the budget itself?
Yeah, so for the TIFIA loan, we were able to defer principal payments for 9 years. So we were able to defer it while the project was in construction, and then an additional 5 years. So what we're doing right now is, with that deferment of the principal, the revenue coming in is being put towards road paving and bridges maintenance in the rural parts of the state. So we're putting about $10 to $12 million a year towards paving, and another 8 million towards bridge projects, red list bridges. Once that, we have to start paying back the principal, which is in 2025. Then the paving and the bridge work we will not be able to continue to do that, because those funds will be going towards the principal payments.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions related to that? Okay.
Yeah, one, if I may, Madam Chair. Am I good to go?
Oh, I'm on mute, so yes, you're good to go. Excuse me.
Thank you. Any information or knowledge or insight coming from Ways and Means around revenues for transportation?
I believe safety has presented to them, and as well as the governor's office on their projections. So what you see in this slide is what the governor has projected for unrestricted revenue for road toll and motor vehicle fees. So these are the projections here the, about 252 million, 254 million. And I think that is still a decline, much like we showed you with the Turnpike system. There is still a decline there, as there's an anticipation that folks are going to continue to, there'll be some remote work, telehealth, all those other items the commissioner had brought up. So they don't quite get back to the levels that we were at before COVID, but I think they're gradually increasing each year.
So there hasn't been any particular talk about how one might increase revenues. These are just the predictions for now, but any discussion about what they might be able to do? Or
So Marie touched on some of the things that are in the governor's budget. So she mentioned there's been a transfer of general funds into the highway fund. That's associated with when there was one-time general fund surplus. HB 1817 provided general fund revenue to the DOT for the completion of some bridge projects. We had one project left to complete using those HB 1817 dollars. We were able to switch the funding to federal funds. And then the remaining 8 million has been put into the highway fund as part of balancing the budget in the governor's phase. And so the budget that you've been provided is a balanced budget. We'll talk about some of our additional needs, but overall, while the highway fund revenue has been flat in prior biennium and then was certainly impacted by COVID, other sources of revenue have been introduced to fund some of our activities. Plus, we talked about it earlier, we did receive that 41 million in federal relief that we have also used to fund some of our operations. So typically federal highway dollars cannot be used for operations. But on this occasion, it was 41 million with full flexibility. And so that also has taken the pressures off. But later on, we'll show you what we can and can't accomplish with this budget. But between the federal funds and the general funds, everything is currently balanced despite the challenges. And I'm very empathetic to our own state legislature. The FAST Act, the federal authorization for transportation, expires in September. It actually expired in September of 2020, but Congress passed a one-year extension and also added funding into the Highway Trust Fund to make sure they could fund all of the commitments in that one-year extension. And certainly Congress will be debating how to fund reauthorization, and they're seeing the same thing at the federal level. As fuel efficiency increases, revenues are declining through traditional sources, and then further with COVID-19 and more limited travel, there has been a reduction in gas tax receipts as well. So I know that the New Hampshire legislature needs to understand how Congress is going to fund transportation into the future, to then understand what the gap might be and what steps you might want to take. But we're hopeful that through reauthorization, given the pandemic and everything that it is meant for transportation, that will be provided some more flexibility as well as some additional dollars. And I can appreciate our legislature wanting to wait and see what money is provided at the federal level before you would take action at the state level.
So now,
Okay, go ahead. Marie.
sorry, I was just going to say, so now I'll touch upon the highway fund budget. So beginning, so the department was required to have a funding reduction of 7% in the agency phase for FY22, and then a 1% increase to FY23 from the FY22 level. So as part of our reductions, we had to reduce our fleet equipment. We reduced that by more than $6 million a year. We had reduced our preventative maintenance. So unfortunately, these were programs put into the budget, new programs put into the budget last time in 2021. But with COVID and, our need to try to conserve highway funds. We did not move forward with these new programs, and therefore they have also been reduced in the 22-23 budget. And that includes our bridge washing of about $1.7 million per year, guardrail repairs of about $1 million a year, tree trimming and brush clearing of a little over $1 million, and then graffiti removal of about $200,000 a year. We also reduced temporary positions, overtime, et cetera, in our engineering intern program.
Marie, Representative Petrie has a question.
Okay.
Let me see, am I on here? Where'd it go? Can you hear me? Okay, all right. The question is, I got a call from Pittsburgh area, and a citizen was concerned that I guess one of the maintenance people had a two-wheel drive vehicle, and up in the North Country that, could you explain that, please? Are we that short of money? Because it's, and I guess he asked the question whether or not why he had that, and they said there wasn't enough money to buy a four-wheel drive vehicle.
Representative Petrie, if you don't mind, can we defer that question? We have a slide and we're going to talk about the fleet in more detail in a couple of minutes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Let's circle back to that when we get to that part of our presentation. I appreciate your patience.
And so then, as the commissioner and Chris had discussed before, we received $41 million in federal funding as part of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act. And this was used to displace highway fund expenditures in FY22. And then, as was just discussed earlier as well, HB 1817 for that one bridge project, we did 8.1 million of unspent appropriations is being lapsed and will be transferred to the highway fund to manage this budget. So additional needs that were funded by the governor's office. So we had some areas that were short that we needed funds for. So debt service was one of them. Obviously, we have prior capital projects that have been approved in HB 25. So we needed to be able to pay debt service on those prior commitments. So we had about a $3 million increase from our additional needs by the governor's office. And then block grant had not been sufficiently funded based on the revenue projections. So block grant was also funded appropriately based on the revenue projections coming out of the governor's office and safety. We did, one bit of good news, we did have $12 million over the biennium for our winter maintenance. So this funds DOT's winter maintenance at a 3-year average. So as many of you remember in the past, you know, we weren't even funded at a 3-year average, and annually we would come to the fiscal committee and need to request additional funds to be able to buy salt, rent the equipment and contractors, and provide overtime to folks. So this budget now funds it at the 3-year average. It doesn't mean we may never have to come back to the fiscal committee again, but at least we're funded at a more appropriate level. And only in extreme winters will we need to come back and potentially ask for additional funds. Some other smaller items that were funded by the governor's office that were additional needs was related to DOIT, and that was for Office 365. Transfer to general services for building maintenance to maintain for the buildings here at DOT. Transfer to justice for the AG's support of DOT, and then the project development engineering intern program was funded at about $400,000 for the biennium. So those were the additional needs funded during the governor's phase. So we still have some other additional needs that were not funded. The first is what we've been discussing already, is our fleet. So we have about 6.4 million per year, 12.8 million over the biennium of an increase to fund our fleet equipment so that we can be at our recommended replacement criteria. And Chris will be going through that detailed information to kind of show that the status of our fleet in the recommended replacement criteria and how far we're behind in replacing our equipment. We also have some needs for bridge maintenance in our traffic bureaus for equipment with the deferred purchases, due to the COVID reductions. These are important items that those bureaus need to be able to continue to do their work. And because we had to lapse those funds in FY20, some of those funds, they're behind again in some of their equipment purchases and, having to defer those items related to the COVID pandemic. Preventative maintenance. So these programs that we had to cut based on the revenue, based on the reductions we had in the governor's agency phase, not the governor's, the agency phase of the budget, sorry. So we're still requesting these additional needs. We do believe that the guardrail maintenance and repairs are extremely important. It's a safety issue, and federal funds are not eligible for maintenance and repairs in this area. So we do have some federal funds that when we're putting in new guardrail in a project, but we cannot maintain and repair guardrail that may be damaged with federal funds. So we do have these funds that we need. And then there's the bridge washing program. Again, federal funds you can't use federal funds for maintenance. So the bridge washing program removes the salt and elements that damage the bridges, and it would allow the washing of the more expensive and larger tier 1 bridges annually, and to be able to do that preventative maintenance and make the life of those bridges last a bit longer. We have our telematics devices, equipment and software for mechanical services, about 0.7 million over the biennium. These are these are the telematics devices for all the fleet equipment to be able to monitor efficiencies for fuel and maintenance, location, and that type of thing. We do believe that having the telematics will provide savings to the department, and something that we've had in our budget now for several bienniums, but it just hasn't been a priority to get funded. The next item are the ITS devices, repairs and maintenance and consultants for our TSMO Bureau. That's our transportation systems and management operations. So those are the folks that monitor the traffic on all the highways. They have the cameras and the monitors to be able to regulate the traffic and know when there are accidents and be able to dispatch help. So over the past years, we've had a significant increase in the number of devices. So federal projects allow you to buy the devices and put them in to the corridors all along I-93, turnpikes going up north, 89. But as we're increasing those devices, based on the tight budgets we've had, we haven't been able to increase the maintenance and repair of those devices. Well, some of those now are getting old. They're starting to break more frequently. And so we need these additional funds to be able to maintain and repair. Again, just like the fleet, be able to maintain and repair the equipment that we've put in our system. And then we have the graffiti removal that we had identified that we had moved out of the budget as well. That's about 400,000 over the biennium. And then the last item is, some of you may be aware, some may not. So FHWA law has a 10-20 year rule. So basically it's 10 years for engineering, 20 years for right-of-way. So when you start a project and you spend money in engineering, You have up to 10 years to move to the right-of-way acquisition or to construction. And once you go to right-of-way, then you have 20 years to get to construction. So the Conway Bypass project has not gone to construction. The layout was recently dissolved at GNC, and the project's not part of the 10-year plan anymore. So because of that law FHWA we have spent money on primarily the right-of-way and acquisition of property that will not be used for the Conway Bypass. So therefore we have to pay back Federal Highway those funds. So this $2 million per year payback, we have reserved some money for the payback, but we are still in need of approximately $6 to $8 million of funds to be able to pay back what we think they're going to ask us for. So this $2 million per year of additional needs is to help continue to put funds aside to be able to pay back the Conway project. Are there any questions on that or?
Marie,
Yes.
this Representative Umberger. I would like to ask you to give me a call so that we can have a longer discussion on the Conway Bypass, because it's obviously, you know, that it's right here in my backyard. So I knew that this was coming. I just need to have a fuller understanding of what's going on. So.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, are there any other questions? If not, I'll turn it over to the commissioner to discuss the issues and challenges.
So as you've heard several times this morning, long term, we are still concerned about the health of the highway fund and the structural issues. But fortunately, we did receive the federal relief dollars, and we're optimistic that we'll get some additional flexibility through future federal actions. So it appears that with the cuts that we have made and the work that we are deferring, that we can advance with an adequate budget for this year, but there will be some of those looming liabilities that we've discussed in the past. Our biggest concern still remains the fleet. For the new committee members, and Chris will do a deeper dive in a moment, but the replacement value of our fleet is around 90 million. So if trucks last approximately 10 years, we should be spending around 8 to 9 million annually on vehicles. We had not been doing that for many, many years, and we were supported by the legislature and the governor during the last budget with both capital dollars to play catch up and address our backlog of fleet replacements, as well as a significant increase in our operating budget to start to invest at the appropriate level. Unfortunately, then COVID hits, we did not move forward with all of the purchases as we had planned because of the revenue uncertainty. And now in this budget, we're back down to the $2 to $3 million per year level, as opposed to the $8 million level. So Chris will do the deeper dive, but that's still our biggest concern overall. But if there was some one-time federal relief money provided to the state, we would hope that we could use some of that for fleet purchases. But of course, it's too early to tell what types of stimulus or relief dollars may be provided. And then as Marie outlined, there's all of these preventative maintenance items, whether it's keeping up with guardrail, the graffiti removal. These are things that we're just unable to complete with our current resources. We're focused on the assets that have the most value and trying to maintain those. And unfortunately, things like bridge washing, we're washing bridges every other year. Ideally, we'd wash them annually, but we have to stretch the resources and do a little bit of everything with the budget that we have. And then the other challenge that's ongoing, especially in winter months, is in the southern sections of the state, as well as along the borders with neighboring states. There's a lot more competition for contractors. So for winter maintenance in particular, we are struggling at times to find adequate contractors to complement our DOT staff. If we have a mild winter, we don't use the contractors to the same degree, and that's why we manage our programs that way. You know, in the higher elevations and the northern parts of the state where we get a lot more snowfall year to year, we have more of our own forces plowing and treating the roadways. In the southern sections of the state, we rely more heavily on contractors so that in the years when we have a mild winter, we're not incurring the costs of having a large team who aren't needed 100% of the time. But the downside is, you know, we need to be able to attract and retain those contractors to work alongside our folks. So that's still a concern. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, Commissioner, obviously, any money that was authorized in the package that passed in December has not been accounted for in your budget. Is that correct?
It was not accounted for in our agency phase, but the governor included those dollars in our budget. So there was
Okay.
activities that would typically be funded with highway fund revenue. And we're counting on that federal revenue to fund some of those aspects. That's why our draw on the highway fund is lower in the first year of the biennium.
Okay, so in the governor's phase, he has guessed about how much the latest act, the one that was passed in December.
It's the 41 million. Marie, can you go back through the slides to the bar chart that Chris talked about?
Okay, I got the 41 million, and
I
that's
just wanted to show you how the stacks look.
okay.
Oh, here. So you'll see in our agency phase, you know, we were anticipating a draw of 216 million approximately on the highway fund. When we received the 41 million in relief dollars, our draw on the highway fund has been reduced to 182 million, while our federal funding has been increased from 207 to 248.5. So that's where the 41 million comes into play. Would have been highway funded to federally funded.
I'm trying to understand, was the 41 million based on the first CARES Act?
No, the first CARES Act provided nothing for highways. It was only support for airports and public transportation. It was a bill that was passed in December that has a much less friendly acronym. It was that bill that provided the 41 million. So in the agency phase, we did not know that money was coming, whereas now we're in the governor's phase. That 41 million was provided for state DOTs. So that's how we were able to work with the governor's office and switch things out from highway funded to federally funded.
Okay, so, all right, thank you very much, and we'll see what happens. Appreciate that very much.
So that revenue that federal funding is certain. That was provided in December. Those dollars are coming to the state for the state DOT. Okay, Marie, do you want to go back to?
And Representative Umberger, just so you know, page 876 of the governor's budget is the county. That's the county unit 3007. It's our highway maintenance bureau. And that's where you can see the 41 million of federal funds has been appropriated. And you can see how that change in there, 41 million of federal funds.
All right, thank you, Marie. I appreciate that. I've just been confused about which money we were talking about, and I thank you.
You're welcome.
And so the other item that was touched on is, you know, in the short term, we're taking the revenue from SB 367, which was the road toll or gas tax increase, and we are paying interest only on the TIFIA loan. That was the loan for I-93 that Representative Petrie asked about. But eventually, as Marie explained, when we start to pay the principal, then we will have less capacity to do work on rural roads and bridges. Many of the sections of roadway that we're paving with this revenue that's available in the near term, these are roads that are not typically eligible for federal funds. And part of the reason we secured the loan and got such a low rate was because we pledged to stretch the value of SB 367 and do the work in these regions of the state where the condition of the infrastructure really warranted more investment. So we're very fortunate because of this program and because of the legislature passing this bill. We're experiencing some of the best road and bridge condition that we have in a long, long time. But we just have that concern that once we start to pay principal on the loan, then the condition will deteriorate again because we just don't have the capacity. This is something we also are advocating for at the federal level for additional investment and more flexibility to do some work on the what they call the off system, the non-federal aid eligible system. So that will need to be addressed at some point.
I do have a question.
This biennium.
Did 367 have a timeline on it, or is that
Yes, when the loan for I-93 is paid off, then the increase in the road toll or gas tax sunsets.
okay? And when are we projecting that? I'm sorry, I know somebody said it, but
2034, isn't that correct, Marie?
That's correct.
all right, thank you very much.
So this ties into this next bullet item, which is the limited state funding for non-Fed eligible roads. So part of the reason that we ended up in this situation where we wanted to invest more is because 1,140 miles of our roadway network that is state-owned is not eligible for federal dollars. So SB 367 has really given us a lot of flexibility, and with the additional revenue, we're paving around 1,800 miles in total over the duration of the program. But longer term, this is something that we don't want to sneak up on the legislature, that you'd have time to take action and prepare accordingly. Other items on this slide we've also touched on previously today. As was mentioned, our current vacancy rate is around 15%. That is our vacancy rate department-wide. The timing of COVID-19 meant that some bureaus were disproportionately impacted. For example, we often hold some of our vacancies in highway design so that we can recruit from recent college graduates in the springtime. And of course, the hiring freeze was implemented in March. So at one point, our vacancy rate in highway design was around 25 to 26%. With the hiring freeze now being lifted and the governor's 22-23 budget being finalized, we're starting to work to backfill some of those vacancies. Other bureaus that were significantly impacted support both our project development activities as well as other areas of DOT. So for example, in the Bureau of Right-of-Way, certain work units have seen a 50% vacancy rate. And then our Office of Federal Compliance, they have seen vacancy rates in excess of 60%. So some of our very small bureaus, if we only had 12 or 15 positions and circumstances were such that we had a lot of vacancies before the pandemic, they have really been struggling to keep up during this time. But the good news is, now that the hiring freeze is lifted, we're actively working to recruit, but it will take us some time to catch up on a lot of the work that was deferred just to limited resources. Other items up here, transit funding, we touched on it. Typically, the state does not provide a lot of assistance to match federal dollars. In the short term, this is not a challenge because, at least on the operating side, we can use the CARES Act federal funds at 100%. But beyond this biennium, that will continue to be a challenge, making sure that we have matching dollars to access federal programs. And then the last two items, Marie touched on this, the state match for the federal highway program, and she explained the toll credit program. So basically, the Turnpike system, to explain how we actually accrue toll credits in the first place, because the Turnpike system predates the federal highway, the federal aid system and the national highway system, we have always collected our own revenue to take care of those assets. And we typically don't draw on federal funds to maintain the Turnpike. But those are high volume roadways of critical importance to the movement of goods and people. And so every time we invest in our Turnpike system, we accrue credits with the federal government. Now, this is not cash, it's purely a credit. And so Marie explained how we leverage those credits to access federal funds. So for every, keeping it in simple terms, for every $80 the federal government gives us, typically you bring $20 of cash match to the table and you spend $100. What we do in New Hampshire is we spend the $80 and match it with $20 of toll credits. It's not real cash though, it's just a credit. It's a way of accessing federal money. So we only spend $80. So this means that our programs are proportionally much smaller than some of our neighboring states, which do bring a cash match to access their federal funds. Beyond that, New Hampshire also receives the least federal funding of all the states where transportation is concerned, something that our delegation is always trying to work on. So it means the size of our construction program is smaller than states of similar size with, in some cases, they have less lane miles to manage than we do. And so that's one of our challenges. The good news is we have very high balances of toll credits. So when there's federal grants or at the end of the year, when there's federal redistribution, and that's when they provide access to additional federal dollars that have not been spent, New Hampshire's in a strong position. We don't have to come back to the legislature and ask you for the state match to be able to access those dollars. We know we have the toll credits. And so any grants that we're awarded or redistribution that we get, we can immediately proceed to spend those financial resources. So there are pluses and minuses to the utilization of toll credits, but overall, the one downside is that our program is a little bit smaller compared to other states. And then the last item is the State Aid Bridge Program. I receive emails from elected officials all the time talking about municipally owned bridges that are in poor condition and whether or not there's any state assistance available to help them either rehab or replace that structure. Unfortunately, all we have available is 6.8 million annually, funded through SB 367 to make those bridge improvements at the municipal level. And so that is something that we hear frequently, is that that program, the towns are struggling to maintain their own infrastructure, and they would very much appreciate any additional assistance from the state. Madam Chair, I think someone has their hand raised. I don't know if, oh, there you are.
Okay, I'm sorry. Representative Murray, did you have a question?
No, not me.
I think it was
Okay.
Representative Heath and then Representative Bucco, if that's helpful, Madam Chair.
That's very helpful. I was off camera here. So Representative Heath, did you want to go ahead?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me ask a question, Madam Chair. And thank you, Victoria. I want to go back to your fleet underfunding. Now, I just want to make sure I have this correct. So in your budget, you requested $8 million for your fleet. And you were, in the governor's phase, you were given 2 million. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. We were given targets in the agency phase.
Yeah.
And given the health of the highway fund, the budget that we presented also underfunded the investment in the fleet because we felt that there was other higher priorities in terms of investments that we should be making, knowing what the revenue outlook for the highway fund was. The governor funded us at a similar level to what we requested in our agency budget. However, we know that's an area of concern and where we should be spending more money. But we agreed with the governor that there are other investments that we should be making before we increase the funding for the fleet. We wouldn't want to increase the funding for equipment and vehicles at the expense of other areas.
All right, thank you.
Representative Bucco, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the commissioners for presenting today, and Marie and Kathy. And on page 23, the page we were just on, you use a rather shocking term here. It's called structural insolvency. Can you explain the effects of that, please?
So when we talk about the highway fund, we're talking about the fact that there is additional revenue beyond what we're collecting from traditional sources that's necessary to balance the budget. So Marie showed you the slide where we had the one-time fixes in prior biennium. This time around, we have, as been stated several times, the 41 million of relief funding, as well as the transfer of the 8 million of general funds to balance the budget. But at the end of the day, even before COVID, we know that people are driving more fuel efficient vehicles. And therefore, even though they might have been driving more pre-pandemic, our revenues were either fairly flat or declining. Meanwhile, the cost of doing business goes up. And so this is something that they're grappling with at the federal level and will need to be addressed at the state level, depending on what happens and how quickly there's wide adoption of electric vehicles. We're going to continue to see erosion of revenue from traditional sources. And that's why there's a lot of conversations about how do we fund transportation into the future. But each biennium, we're coming up with one-time solutions to make sure that we have a balanced budget. And then longer term, we still need to find the right solution and something that's acceptable to the legislature. But you're not alone. The Congress is having exactly the same debate.
Thank you.
Commissioner, we have not made any progress, as far as I know, on changing the electric vehicle charges for using the roads. Is that correct?
Correct. There's been several bills that have come forward. Some of them were specifically requiring electric vehicles to pay more in vehicle registration as a way to offset the fact that they're not contributing with what we call the road toll or paying gas tax at the state level. There's been other bills like Representative Major, his concept of a road usage fee that didn't just target electric vehicles, but targeted all of the vehicles that are higher fuel efficiency, hybrids, as well as every make and model on the road today is much more fuel efficient than it was 10 or 20 years ago. Personally, I used to drive an old Ford Explorer that got about 11, 12 miles to the gallon. The models that you can buy today get 24, 25 miles to the gallon, sometimes even higher than that, depending on the nature of the driving that you do. So it's the entire fleet that's on the road today is just more fuel efficient than the vehicles that previously were contributing. And this is why it's so challenging to think about a long-term source of funding for transportation. At the federal level, they've been talking about tracking vehicle miles traveled, and it would be a user fee. You pay per mile of the system that you utilize. But there's a lot of concerns around privacy and how that data would be collected and audited and such. And so that's why there hasn't been a permanent solution. But most of the legislation that's been proposed here in New Hampshire has been around a registration surcharge type concept, either targeting electric vehicles or a sliding scale where the registration would increase as the fuel efficiency of your vehicle increases. So it's it's not really looking at increasing the investment. The concept being, we're asking people to pay what they would have paid before when they drove a less fuel efficient vehicle.
There's nothing in the legislature this year that I'm aware of, or is there?
I don't believe there's any bills. We haven't been asked to provide fiscal notes or testify on any.
Okay, I didn't think so. All right, thank you.
So the last item that we wanted to talk about, if there's no further questions, is that deeper dive into the fleet. So at this point, I'll turn it back to Chris, and he'll explain a little bit more detail what the deferred investment in equipment means. And this is one of the areas where, you know, our trucks have to run. We have to plow the roads. We need that equipment to perform our critical activities. And so it's always my concern that when we don't replace vehicles in the appropriate time frame, we spend a lot of money band-aiding them and keeping them roadworthy. And so in a way, we throw good money after bad. And it causes a lot more headaches for our team. You know, not only is it stressful working long hours in the winter and trying to keep the roads clear, but then when you have equipment that breaks down and you're trying to get that back up and running, that's just not only an expensive way to do things, but it's also extremely burdensome on the staff whose primary focus is public safety and getting their core work done. So with that, I'll let Chris walk you through the numbers that we have up on the slide.
Thank you, Commissioner. So this slide, and there's a lot of information on this slide. I'm going to try to summarize it, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. But at the end of each fiscal year, our Mechanical Services Bureau compiles kind of this fleet statistics, and it's based as of July 1st, 2020. It takes into account what currently exists in terms of all the trucks, heavy equipment, passenger vehicles, and so on, what stage they're in terms of their life expectancy, and then which ones exceed the parameters that we have in place. So for example, our heavy trucks, six-wheelers and 10-wheelers, we expect them to last 12 to 15 years and have roughly about 250,000 miles. Light trucks like the half-ton, three-quarter-ton vehicles, we expect them to last about 150,000 miles and about 7 to 10 years. So those are kind of the parameters we're using. So you can see on this chart, we have the total number of units, about 1,258 units that we have. And you can see in that column D, the number of units in each category. So for example, we have 70 that are categorized as extra heavy duty trucks. Those are our 10-wheelers. Those are our striper trucks, tractor trucks, bridge inspector truck. The heavy duty trucks, those are our six-wheelers. Those are pretty much our, the primary plow trucks that we have. Those are our six-wheelers. We have 260 units of those. Medium duty, those are ton and a half trucks. Light duty, three-quarter, half-ton, and so on. Associated equipment, those are just spreaders that we have. And probably the other big piece is the mobile equipment, construction. Those are our graders and loaders. So you can see the approximate replacement value cost of each one of those categories. And in column F, the number that exceed the life expectancy, the life age or usage parameter. So in total, roughly 277 of the 1,258 units exceeded the parameters, or 22%. In order to replace all that, you can see in column J, there's a replacement cost associated with that. And all the way down at the bottom, that totals up to $33 million. Now, this was done as of July 1st, 2020. So since that time, we still had Plan 20 and 21 acquisitions that were in various stages of being purchased and being put in service. So that was actually $16 million. So in essence, what I like to call our backlog is roughly that 16.8 million. Now, I do want to say we have done, in the legislature and the governor working with the department has really done, great in terms of providing some funding for fleet over the last two bienniums. We had two capital budget items, $10 million in each biennium, that helped with addressing the backlog. And in the last biennium, our fleet was, I would say our fleet was fully funded. However, because of COVID, we did have to look hard at that, and we did lapse some of those funds. We also received VW settlement funds for our heavy equipment. I believe we received roughly 4 million, a little over 4 million for that from that source of funding. So we have done well in the past. We are with the current budget. My fear is we're going to fall behind again. The $2 million certainly is not enough to even sustain the vehicles that will next year be beyond our fleet parameters. So in essence, we've noted an 8.9 million is really what our target level should be annually to put towards fleet equipment replacements. If we do not put that dollar forth, then we're going to fall behind. And I think, to catch up over time, if we spread this out over 5 years, just addressing this backlog of 16.8 million, we would have to, provide 3.3 million over the 8.9 million in order just to address the backlog and get everything on a sustainable schedule. So with that, I know there was a question relative to two-wheel pickups versus four-wheel pickups in the North Country. I'll answer that and then answer, any other questions. But, basically that four-wheel drive pickup trucks costs probably $3,000 to $5,000 more than your two-wheel pickup. If you look at the 141 number and 173 number, that's how many pickups that we have, half ton to 3/4 ton. So it really boils down to a standard. And if we look at that class of truck, if we convert all those two-wheel pickups to four-wheel pickups, you'll be looking at probably needing another $1.5 million roughly in order to do that. So we are evaluating the benefit cost of that. Certainly a four-wheel drive pickup costs more upfront and more long-term to maintain. We have an equipment needs committee that will be looking much closer at that. I know there's a lot of foremen that feel they need a four-wheel drive pickup, but it has been a decision in the past that two-wheel, suffices when we look at the cost, the overall cost of that category of the fleet. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any other questions.
Representative Heath, you had a question?
Yes, I just want to go back to the 10 million that was appropriated in the capital budget. Did I hear you say that some of those funds were lapsed and they actually did not go toward the fleet?
Nope. What I meant to say, the capital funds did not lapse. We're still working on drawing those funds down. What has lapsed is in the last budget, I think we had roughly $9 million in each year for fleet equipment. Some of those funds in 20 have lapsed, and in 21, they're not being expended.
Can you explain to me why?
Just because of the situation with the highway fund, we were looking at, essential purchases, and at that time we were deeming that there were other more important expenditures that were necessary, and we needed to make sure that we didn't run the highway fund into such a negative state that it was going to be difficult to address that in this budget.
And one final question, if you don't mind. I just need to go back to the fleet maintenance. You say that you need $8 million a year, but you only have $2 million a year. And this is by not budgeting $8 million a year, it puts you way behind. Can you just speak to that again? Because it sounds like there was enough money, but it didn't have, it lapsed because of the situation. I
So-
just need more explanation, please.
Yeah, so Representative Heath, traditionally, we were underfunded for equipment. This is how we came to have a significant backlog. So if you recall, during the last budget, we were advocating for both capital dollars to play catch up on that backlog. And then for the first time in many, many years, you increased our budget so we could replace vehicles. So that's what Chris is referring to. So we had a capital budget item in HB 25 to address prior deferred replacements. And then you increase the funding in our operating budget to around that $9 million per year, so we could keep pace going forward and start replacing vehicles at the right frequency. But when COVID hit and we knew that there was nobody driving, which was absolutely necessary, right, to stop the spread of COVID-19, we completely support why we had stay-at-home orders and why then the governor flexed things open, on a gradual basis. But with the revenue picture being so uncertain, there was a hiring freeze implemented. All of our capital purchases were frozen because the last thing we wanted to do was incur more debt and not having the revenue to pay the debt service in the next biennium. And then in addition, we were asked to lapse as much money as we could to put us in a strong position for this upcoming budget. And so that's what Chris is referring to. We did not move forward with the capital budget items because those were frozen temporarily. That has been lifted now that we understand, what is budgeted for debt service in the governor's budget for 22 and 23. We're moving forward with some of our capital budget items that were approved last time around. And then in addition, we lapsed the majority of the funding that was provided in our operating budget that was associated with truck purchases that we hadn't initiated when COVID hit. So we did not replace the vehicles that we had intended to replace when you gave us that additional 18 million for the biennium. So that's why it looks like we didn't have the money. We did, but then we didn't spend it. It was because of COVID, and we proceeded very cautiously. And we talked about, we tightened our belts and we focused on core maintenance activities. So we did not make any large purchases, whether it was materials or equipment. We did a lot of more traditional preventative maintenance and smaller scale projects this past year in an effort to save as much money as we could. Another area, typically we would have hired a lot of seasonal help for things like line striping. Instead of bringing in seasonal workers, our highway maintenance crews staffed and supported line striping efforts, which then meant we were able to lapse more money on the highway side because we were very concerned about the revenue outlook. And so for this budget, I want to say again, in our agency phase, we too agree that we don't want to fund the fleet at the expense of other areas of the department. And that's what you see in the governor's budget. But certainly if there was to be more revenue or one-time federal money where we had flexibility on how we use it, the fleet is the first thing that we would want to fund, and replacing these trucks will make us run more efficiently as a department and take a lot of stress off the employees who end up having to work on these older vehicles.
All right, thank you. It's just very frustrating to hear. We worked so hard to get you those extra dollars and then to hear that they weren't used. Thank you.
And none of us anticipated, though, the financial situation that COVID would have put us in. So yeah, we're sorry that hard work and the support that we saw from the governor and the legislature, we weren't able to execute on the plan that we developed together.
Representative Bucco, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I might be repeating what you've already said, but I want to be clear on what I'm looking at on this page, mechanical services. So it says current replacement needs are 33 million and planned for 2021 is 16.2 million, leaving a a shortage of 16.8 million. Is that correct, first of all, I guess?
That is correct. So those planned fiscal year 20 and 21 acquisitions, they're with a capital budget that was appropriated. They are with VW settlement, and some of the monies for equipment that were not lapsed.
Thank you. And may I have a follow-up?
Certainly.
Down in the bottom left-hand corner, you have catch-up time, and so to pay it off, to catch up in 1 year would be 16.7 million, which is the total on the other column, or it's broken down into 5 years and 10 years. I guess that's my question. Well, the other question was you need 8 million per year is what you should have.
Yeah, so to keep replacing vehicles at the appropriate frequency, our suggestion would be to fund things at that $8 to $9 million mark, so that we'd be taking vehicles off the road, at the right time and not incurring all of this additional expense trying to keep them running. While we very much love the federal government to give us some, stimulus dollars or have access to funding to address the fleet, we would be very concerned if we replaced all of the vehicles at one time, because then 10 years from now or 12 years from now, you'd have that looming liability that we'd have a lot of vehicles all reaching the end of their useful life around the same time. So that's why we show you some, different timeframes over which to address the backlog, so that you could invest a smaller amount and not end up, a decade from now in a similar situation.
Thank you.
Representative Lynn, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I understand it. It sounds like you have challenges in a number of areas, and I completely understand that. And I'm just wondering, this last area, the maintenance of the fleet that you talked about, it seems to me is particularly critical. I mean, especially in winter months for snow plowing and stuff like that. And so I guess one of the things I'm just wondering, I know you mentioned that the hiring freeze has now been lifted and that you were talking about, I think earlier, hiring certain personnel in the, like for that do things like planning new projects and that kind of thing. And I don't mean to suggest for a minute that I don't think that's important, but I'm just wondering in terms of sort of ordering priorities in what is a very difficult time, since you don't have the people that, you don't have those hires that you need, would it be better not to hire them, to put that off, for another year or even another 2 years and do more to upgrade the fleet?
So Representative Lynn, I think it would be helpful if I take some time to explain our municipal aid and construction program. So we really don't use a lot of highway funds to replace and expand our infrastructure. The majority of the money that we're spending in construction is federal dollars or Turnpike dollars, with some money going to betterment projects and work on roadways that aren't eligible for federal assistance. But even in those categories, a lot of the money is coming from SB 367. So it's pledged to that rural bridge and paving. We can't take that money and spend it in a different way. And that was one of the conditions of the federal loan that we got. We had to pledge that revenue. And so what you're talking about is deferring work that isn't actually funded with highway funds. The majority of our project development activity and our construction activity is funded from these other sources. And those revenues are either state funds that are restricted or federal programs where we cannot use the money for routine operations and maintenance. And so it's our operations and maintenance that most heavily draws on the highway fund. And when we talk about operations, it's really our people that drive the trucks and do the work, the equipment, and then the materials that are necessary, for, either buying salt, or in the summer months, it's, buying asphalt or pipe or whatever it is we're using for our routine work. So that's the most challenging part about transportation. Actually, when we work on the 10-year plan with your colleagues in Public Works and Highways, we go through all the colors of money and the restrictions and how we can spend it. But really, when we're talking about the unrestricted revenue, that's only funding our operations activities, and we're making really tough decisions. That's why we get a lot of complaints about things like mowing and litter pickup and graffiti removal, because with the financial health of the highway fund, we're focusing on public safety first and foremost, and then state of good repair, and we get to all of the more aesthetic things if and when the resources materialize.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that explanation.
Representative Murray, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, you may want to answer this later. I know we worked really hard last time to try to do some sort of a plan to help you get out of this equipment morass. And if there's one best thing we can do for you this round, would it be to try to come up with that 6 or 8, I guess if there's 2 million in there, the 6 million, to try to get you back on track in terms of replacing equipment? Or are there other things that what's the one best thing we can do for you in this budget round?
And there's a reason we finished with this equipment slide. If there was either one-time federal revenue that comes in the next several months, if there's a stimulus package passed by Congress, or there's any general funds or other sources of revenue available, then we know exactly where we'd put it. It would be to fund the replacement of vehicles.
I think we'll give it our best shot. So.
But we would not, as I keep saying, in our own agency phase, we did not fund the equipment at a higher level than the governor did, because we would not want to see cuts elsewhere, because you're talking about limiting our capacity to perform the work. We need all three. We need people, equipment, and materials.
Are there any further questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, we truly appreciate your openness and all of the things that you have brought to us today. And just so that we will be scheduling something next week to, I'm not sure which day at this point, but to do a deeper dive into the finances of the highway fund. And so really, I appreciate this very, very much. And thank you all for coming. For the committee, we will meet again at 1 o'clock to tackle safety. And so two big areas today that we're looking at. So again, thank you, and we'll see you back at 1 o'clock.
Thank you,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you all.
Mickey?
Yes, Representative.
Yeah. It seemed to me from a meeting I was at earlier today that we can sort of shut down until 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna end the webinar, and then I'll just fire it up as if it was at 10 o'clock today, brand new. So just click on the same link to get in.
Okay. And we are now in recess until 1 o'clock. So
All right.
thank you all. We'll see you then.
All right.